When Celine Albright was kicked onto the streets with just $15 to her name, her wealthy stepmother laughed, calling her a penniless loser. But that single $15 bill bought an abandoned, forgotten mud cellar and unleashed a multi-million-dollar secret that would bring her family to their knees. The rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Albright Manor sounded like a countdown. Inside the warmth of the mahogany-panelled library, the atmosphere was ice-cold. Celine Albright stood near the fireplace, her hands trembling as she stared at the two people sitting comfortably on the leather sofa opposite her. Her stepmother, Emma Albright, wore a tailored black Chanel suit that screamed manufactured grief. Beside her sat Richard Emma's 26-year-old son from a previous marriage, a man who had spent his entire life treating Selena like an intruder in her own home. Only 4 days had passed since the sudden, devastating stroke that took Selena's father, Arthur Albright. Arthur had been a self-made titan in the East Coast logistics and real estate industries, but to Selena, he was just Dad, the man who taught her how to fish, how to read architectural blueprints, and how to value integrity above all else. I'm going to read this directly, so there is absolutely no room for misunderstanding, Selene, said Thomas Harrington, the family's longtime estate attorney. He didn't look Selene in the eye. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and stared down at a pristine, stapled document. According to the codicil executed by your father, exactly 3 weeks prior to his passing, the entirety of the Albright estate, including the logistics firm, the Rhinebeck Manor, all liquid capital, and overseas holdings, is bequeathed solely to Emma Albright and her son Richard. Celine felt the air leave her lungs as if she had been struck in the chest. What, that's impossible. My father told me less than a month ago that the estate was being split evenly, and that the historic Rhinebeck Manor would be mine. He built this place for my mother. Emma sighed a theatrical, exhausting sound. Oh, Selena, darling. Your father realized toward the end that you simply didn't have the business acumen to handle this level of responsibility. You always were more interested in dusty history books than the family legacy. This is a lie, Celine whispered, her voice shaking but growing sharper. He was heavily medicated 3 weeks ago. He couldn't even sign his own name without his hand shaking. Let me see that signature. Richard stood up, stepping between Celine and the lawyer. At 6'2", with a sneer that matched his mother's cold eyes, he looked down at her. The document is legally binding, Celine. It's notarized. Harrington checked it over himself. You don't get to accuse us of anything just because Dad finally saw through your little daddy's girl act. You have 24 hours to pack your personal belongings, Emma added, sipping her tea calmly. And by personal belongings, I mean your clothes. The jewelry your father bought you belongs to the estate. The car belongs to the corporation. We are being generous by not filing a trespassing charge against you right now. Celine looked at Thomas Harrington, desperate for a shred of the loyalty the man had claimed to possess for her father for 30 years. But Harrington just looked away, shuffling his papers. It was clear as day Emma had bought him off. The betrayal was absolute, calculated, and complete. The next morning, Celine stood at the gates of the estate she had grown up in, holding a single canvas duffel bag. The iron gates clicked shut behind her with a definitive heavy thud. Richard drove past her in his luxury sports car, slowing down just enough to roll down the window. He threw a crisp single $15 bill out into the gravel at her feet. "For the bus, sis!" he mocked before stepping on the gas, leaving her in a cloud of exhaust and dust. Selena knelt down and picked up the $15 bill. Her knuckles turned white. Her phone showed a balance of exactly $0. Emma had frozen her supplementary bank accounts by dawn. She had no money, no home, and a family that had successfully erased her from her own father's life. She walked 3 miles to the small apartment of her closest childhood friend, Hannah Mitchell. Hannah opened the door, took one look at Selene's pale face and her canvas bag, and immediately pulled her into a tight hug. "We will fight this, Selene," Hannah promised fiercely over plates of cheap diner food later that evening. "We can hire a forensic accountant, a new lawyer, someone who can prove they forged that codicil." "With what money, Hannah?" Selene asked, looking down at the $15 bill sitting on the kitchen table. "Harrington is the most powerful estate lawyer in the county. He covered his tracks. Right now I am legally penniless." To distract herself from the burning anger and grief, Selene opened Hannah's laptop and began browsing the local government portal. Her father had taught her that when you lose everything, you look at the land. Land didn't lie. As she scrolled through the Dutchess County municipal listings, she stumbled upon a section titled Tax Delinquent Property Liquidations. These were properties abandoned by their owners, seized by the county, and sold at dirt-cheap prices just to clear administrative backlogs. Most were useless strips of marshland or tiny slivers of dirt between highways, costing thousands in back taxes. But one entry caught her eye. Parcel ID 904-B, Township of Rhinebeck. Description: historic subterranean storage structure, root cellar. Status abandoned since 1934. Multiple owner defaults. Minimum processing bid, $15. Selene stared at the screen. The property was a tiny, forgotten piece of land, barely a quarter of an acre, located behind an old defunct railway switch on the absolute edge of town. Because it was classified as a non-residential subterranean utility structure and had zero commercial value, the county had wiped the back taxes just to get it off their books. The minimum bid to cover the paperwork filing was exactly $15. Selene looked from the screen to the $15 bill Richard had thrown at her. A strange, quiet resolve settled over her. "Hannah," she said, her voice dropping to a calm, focused whisper, "tomorrow morning we're going to the county clerk's office." The Dutchess County Clerk's office smelled of old paper and industrial floor cleaner. Robert Dempsey, a tired-looking municipal employee with a thick moustache, looked over the top of his reading glasses at Selene and Hannah. "You want to bid on Parcel 904-B?" Dempsey asked, sounding incredulous. "Miss, that's not a plot of land. That's an old concrete and stone root cellar from the Great Depression era. It's completely overgrown, it's halfway underground, and it's right next to an abandoned rail line that hasn't seen a train since World War II. It's a liability." "Is there any other bid on it?" Selene asked firmly. "No. Nobody has looked at this file in 40 years. "Then I am placing the minimum bid," Selene said. She placed the crisp $15 bill on the counter. Dempsey sighed, shook his head, and stamped the paperwork. "It's your funeral, kid. You now officially own a quarter-acre of weeds and a hole in the dirt." When Selene and Hannah arrived at the location later that afternoon, Dempsey's description proved to be an understatement. The property was hidden behind a thick wall of briars, overgrown oak trees, and rusted iron railway spikes. After hacking through the brush with a pair of rusty garden shears borrowed from Hannah's garage, they found it. A sloping mound of earth covered in thick moss, out of which protruded a massive heavy iron door set, angled into the ground. It looked less like a root cellar and more like a military bunker from a forgotten era. The iron doors were secured with a padlock so rusted it looked like a chunk of oxidized coral. Selene took a heavy crowbar, wedged it into the hasp, and threw her entire weight against it. With a loud, echoing crack, the old lock shattered. Selene pulled the heavy iron door upward. It groaned on screeching dry hinges, releasing a rush of cool, damp air that smelled intensely of earth-old stone and something metallic. "Selene, wait," Hannah said, holding up a bright, tactical flashlight. "We don't know if the ceiling is stable. This thing has been sealed for nearly a century. My dad always said the old masons built things to survive an apocalypse, Selena said, stepping down the crumbling stone steps into the darkness. As the flashlight beam cut through the gloom, they saw a space that was roughly 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. The walls were crafted from beautiful interlocking fieldstone and arched brickwork remarkably dry, despite being underground. Rotting wooden crates and shattered glass jars from the 1930s littered the floor remnants of its life as a legitimate root cellar. But as Selene walked deeper into the space, her eyes trained by her father to notice architectural anomalies, spotted something strange. The cellar's exterior dimensions on the county map didn't align with what she was seeing. The back wall of the cellar was made of poured concrete, a material completely inconsistent with the 19th century fieldstone used for the side walls. Furthermore, the concrete looked much newer, perhaps from the late 1960s or early 70s. Suddenly, the loud, aggressive roar of a sports car engine echoed from the dirt road nearby. Selene and Hannah walked back out into the daylight to see Richard's bright yellow Lamborghini idling by the brush. Richard stepped out, adjusting his designer sunglasses, a camera phone already in his hand. He was filming. "Hey, everyone." Richard spoke loudly into his phone, laughing. "Look at this. This is where the proud Albright legacy ends up." Selena turned down a comfortable life to become the queen of the mole people. "How's your $15 mansion looking, Selene? Need me to throw you another $5 for some rat traps?" Selene stood her ground, her face an unreadable mask of calm. "Get off my property, Richard." "Property?" Richard laughed, turning his camera to face her. "This isn't property, it's a garbage dump. Mom and I just signed the paperwork to sell the logistics firm to a private equity group for $80 million. We're moving to Miami next week. Enjoy your dirt hole." He hopped back into his car, threw dirt into the air as he spun his tires, and roared away. Hannah was shaking with rage. "I hate him, I swear to God, Selene. I hate him so much." "Let him talk," Selene said softly, her eyes locked on the dust trail he left behind. "Arrogance makes people blind. Let's go back inside." Inside the cellar, Selene went straight to the back concrete wall. She took the crowbar and tapped it against the center of the wall. Thud, thud, thud. She moved 3 feet to the left and tapped again. Clang. The sound was completely different. It wasn't the dull, dead absorption of solid concrete meeting stone. It was a sharp, resonant metallic ring. Selene's heart began to race. She shone the flashlight closely at the concrete surface. Now that she was looking for it, she saw a faint, vertical hairline fracture running from the ceiling to the floor perfectly straight. She grabbed a heavy hammer from their tool bag and began smashing the concrete facade near the fracture. The thin layer of concrete shattered easily, flaking away like cheap plaster to reveal what lay beneath. It wasn't stone. It was solid industrial-grade reinforced naval steel. Selene and Hannah worked frantically for the next 3 hours, knocking away the brittle concrete camouflage. By the time the sun had completely set outside, they stood in front of a hidden, massive mid-century blast door built into the subterranean earth. In the center of the steel door was a heavy mechanical combination dial, perfectly preserved, completely free of rust, due to the protective concrete shell that had encased it, and stamped directly into the steel handle above the dial was a name that made Selene's breath catch in her throat: Arthur Albright. The heavy metallic silence of the damp earth pressed against Selene and Hannah as they stared at the gleaming combination dial. The name Arthur Albright, stamped into the cold steel, was not just a label. It was a message, a beacon reaching out from beyond the grave. Hannah aimed the tactical flashlight directly at the center of the mechanism. "Selene." She breathed her voice, barely a whisper in the subterranean dark. "Your father built a bunker, and he sealed it from the inside. No, from the outside. He hid this." Selene reached out her fingers, trembling as they brushed the cold steel of the dial. Her mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Arthur had been a man of immense intellect, a logistics savant, who never left anything to chance. If he had hidden something of this magnitude, the key to unlocking it wouldn't be a generic passcode. It would be something only a true Albright would know, something Emma and Richard could never guess. Birthdays, anniversaries, Hannah suggested, stepping closer. Selene shook her head, staring at the numbers. No. Emma had access to all of his personal files. She knew his social security number, his wedding anniversary, my mother's birthday. It has to be something completely off the grid, something he only shared with me. She closed her eyes, filtering out the musty smell of the cellar, the dripping water from the roots above, and the memory of Richard's mocking laughter. She thought back to the summer she was 12. Her father had taken her to an empty, dusty lot on the edge of the industrial district in Philadelphia. He had pointed to a rusted, derelict warehouse and told her, "This is where it all started. Selene, Route 9, Pier 4, Bay 11. Remember those numbers. 09-04-11. That was the first warehouse I ever bought. That was the day the Albright legacy was born." Emma had never cared about the origins of Arthur's wealth, only the fruits of it. Richard had never cared about logistics, only luxury. Selene gripped the dial. She turned it right to 09. The heavy internal tumblers clicked with a satisfying metallic thud. She spun it left past the zero landing on 04. Another heavy, echoing clank vibrated through the steel. Finally, she turned it right, stopping dead on 11. Silence hung in the air for a terrible, agonizing second. Then, a deep, pneumatic hiss echoed from the frame. The airtight seal of the blast door released, blowing a puff of stale, dry air into the damp root cellar. Hannah grabbed Selene's shoulder, her eyes wide. "You did it!" Selene grabbed the massive steel handle and pulled. Despite weighing over a ton, the heavy door glided open on perfectly balanced internal hinges. Hannah raised the flashlight, but Selene instinctively reached to the right side of the inner wall, feeling for a switch. Her hand brushed against a heavy industrial breaker box. She flipped the main switch upward. A low hum instantly resonated through the concrete floors, followed by the sequential snap, snap, snap of overhead fluorescent lights, aggressively buzzing to life. The space before them was breathtaking. It was an expansive, climate-controlled subterranean vault spanning at least 3,000 square feet. The walls were lined with heavy-duty dehumidifiers, all humming on a dedicated off-grid power generator. But it wasn't the engineering that made Selene drop to her knees. It was what the vault contained. Parked dead center on the polished epoxy floor were 3 breathtakingly pristine vintage automobiles. A 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California Spider, and a 1969 Ford GT40. Selene recognized them instantly. These were the lost, Albright motor collection cars Arthur had supposedly sold off during the 2008 recession to keep the logistics firm afloat. In reality, he had quietly moved them underground. The Ferrari alone was worth upwards of $18 million at auction. "Oh my God," Hannah gasped, walking past the cars toward the back of the room. "Selene, look at this." Stacked neatly against the far wall were a dozen of wooden crates labeled industrial lead. But the crowbar resting nearby told a different story. Hannah pried the lid off the nearest crate. Beneath a layer of packing straw lay rows of gleaming, stamped gold bullion bars. Selene didn't rush toward the gold or the cars. Her eyes were fixed on a simple, heavy iron safe resting on a steel desk in the corner of the room. Sitting on top of the safe was a manila envelope with a single word written in her father's unmistakable sweeping handwriting: Selene. She walked to the desk, her vision blurring with tears. She tore open the envelope and unfolded the heavy parchment paper inside. My dearest Selene, if you are reading this, my worst suspicions have been confirmed, and I am no longer with you. Over the last 6 months, I have felt my mind and body slipping. My doctors diagnosed it as natural decline, but I know better. Emma has been controlling my meals, my medication, and isolating me from my allies. I believe she is systematically poisoning me to accelerate my demise. I knew I did not have the strength to fight her in court while my cognitive functions were failing, and I knew Thomas Harrington had been compromised. I saw the offshore wire transfers Emma made to his accounts. They planned to steal everything from you, so I executed the ultimate contingency. 30 years ago, I bought this worthless parcel of land through a blind trust and built this vault. Inside this safe, you will find the master bearer shares to the Albright Logistics Corporation. I legally transferred 85% of the company's controlling stock into an irrevocable blind trust, the Selene Albright Foundation, before Emma ever had a chance to forge that final codicil. The company she thinks she owns is an empty shell. You will also find a flash drive containing the private investigators' reports I commissioned, proving Emma's financial embezzlement and Harrington's complicity. Use this, my brilliant daughter. Take back what is yours. Burn their deceit to the ground. I love you always, Dad. Selene clutched the letter to her chest, a profound, overwhelming mixture of devastating grief and white-hot vindication washing over her. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had seen the wolves circling, and he had built her a fortress to wage war from. She looked at Hannah, the tears drying on her face, replaced by a cold, unstoppable determination. Hannah, Selene said, her voice echoing off the steel walls of the multi-million-dollar vault. We need to make a phone call to the city. We need to find the most ruthless corporate litigator in New York. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the penthouse boardroom of the Manhattan Financial District was electric. Emma Albright sat at the head of the long mahogany table, radiating triumph. She wore a stunning white designer suit, sipping sparkling water, as she watched the legal teams finalize the paperwork. Richard sat beside her, checking his luxury watch and scrolling through luxury real estate listings in Miami. Across from them sat the board of directors for Apex Private Equity. They were finalizing the aggressive acquisition of Albright Logistics for a staggering $85 million. Thomas Harrington, the corrupt estate lawyer, stood at the projector, looking pleased with himself. And so, gentlemen, with these final signatures, the transfer of all corporate assets from the Albright estate to Apex Equity will be complete. Emma picked up her gold-plated Mont Blanc pen, smiling warmly at the Apex CEO. My late husband would be so proud to see his legacy in such capable hands. Shall we? I don't think Arthur would be proud at all, Emma. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crash. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Selene Albright stood in the doorway. Gone were the damp clothes and the canvas duffel bag. She wore a razor-sharp, tailored midnight blue suit, her posture impeccable, her eyes blazing with an icy, undeniable authority. Flanking her were 2 uniformed federal marshals, and standing directly behind her was William Bradley, the most feared corporate litigator on the eastern seaboard, holding a thick leather briefcase. Richard bolted up from his chair, his face flushing dark red. What the hell is this? Security? How did she get in here? Selena, you have 0 rights to be in this building. Actually, Richard, she has every right, William Bradley said, his booming voice silencing the room as he strolled toward the massive conference table. He unlatched his briefcase and threw a massive stack of certified notarized documents directly over Emma's unsigned contract. Gentlemen of Apex Equity, Bradley addressed the bewildered investors. I strongly advise you to put your pens down. The woman sitting across from you does not own Albright Logistics. She is attempting to sell you stolen property." Emma's face drained of color, turning a sickening ashen grey. "That is an absurd lie, Thomas. Get them out of here." Harrington stepped forward, sweating profusely. "Mr. Bradley, this is highly unorthodox. The codicil explicitly leaves the estate to my client. The codicil is a confirmed forgery." Bradley interrupted sharply, tossing a USB drive onto the table. "Executed while Arthur Albright was under the influence of heavy, unprescribed narcotics administered by Emma Albright. Furthermore, even if the codicil were real, it wouldn't matter." Celine stepped forward, looking down at her stepmother. For the first time in her life, Emma looked small. "My father transferred 85% of the voting bearer shares into an irrevocable trust 3 months before he died." Celine said, her voice steady and echoing clearly in the silent room. "A trust that I am the sole beneficiary of. You don't own the trucks, Emma. You don't own the warehouses. You don't own the intellectual property. You own an empty corporate shell burdened with debt, and you just tried to commit wire fraud by selling it." The Apex CEO stood up immediately, gesturing to his legal team. "Pack it up. We are done here. Emma, expect a call from our lawyers regarding the millions we spent in due diligence." "Wait, please," Richard pleaded, panic breaking through his arrogant facade. "This is a trick. She bought a dirt hole for $15. She's penniless." "That $15 dirt hole," Celine replied coldly, "was Arthur Albright's primary vault. It held the original trust documents, $18 million in vintage automobiles, and $3 million in gold bullion. But most importantly, it held my father's letter." Celine signaled to the federal marshals. They stepped forward, producing a set of handcuffs. "Emma Albright and Richard Albright," the lead marshal stated, grabbing Richard by the arm. "You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and the suspected poisoning of Arthur Albright. Thomas Harrington, you are also being detained for accessory to fraud and forging legal documents." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Richard began screaming, trying to pull away from the marshals, while Emma sat completely frozen, staring at the handcuffs clicking around her wrists, her luxurious white suit suddenly looking like a prison uniform. Harrington slumped into a chair, putting his head between his knees, knowing his legal career and his freedom were permanently over. Selena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the chaotic scene unfold. She didn't smile. There was no joy in watching her family burn, but there was profound, undeniable peace in seeing justice served. Months later, Celine stood in the sunshine outside the heavy steel doors of the subterranean vault in Rhinebeck. The weeds had been cleared away, the railway spikes removed, and the property beautifully landscaped. Hannah walked up beside her, handing her a cup of coffee. "So, Madam CEO, what are we doing with the $15 bunker, turning it into a wine cellar?" Selena looked at the heavy steel door, then out at the horizon. With Emma and Richard awaiting federal trial without bail, and the logistics company booming under her careful, integrity-driven leadership, she finally had room to breathe. "No." Selene smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. "I think we keep it exactly as it is. A reminder that true wealth isn't just about what you inherit on paper. It's about knowing where to dig, and knowing exactly what you're made of. If Selene's incredible journey from a $15 forgotten dirt cellar to reclaiming her rightful multi-million-dollar empire inspired you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a story of ultimate justice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life tales of hidden treasures, shocking family betrayals, and brilliant comebacks. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you found a secret underground vault? See you in the next video.